The Galactic Council had ruled for over 5,000 years, spreading its influence across the known universe. Empires had risen and fallen under its watchful eye. Entire species had been integrated, enslaved, or eradicated. To challenge the Council was to challenge inevitability itself. And yet, an anomaly had emerged, an insignificant creature from a backwater planet called Earth. His name was Commander Jack Callan. A former Navy SEAL, Callan had disappeared from Earth nearly a decade ago during an off-the-books operation. Records showed his last assignment involved classified missions in deep-sea warfare, but no official reports existed about how or why he vanished. For all intents and purposes, he had ceased to exist. Until now. The first whispers of his return had come from the frontier colonies, where cargo freighters and smugglers spoke in hushed voices about a lone warrior taking down entire battalions. A ghost, they called him. A myth. He moved through war zones like a phantom, striking surgically and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Some claimed he had stolen advanced weaponry from an ancient alien vault. Others swore he had been modified beyond human capability. The truth was worse. Callan had uncovered something that could destroy the Council itself. The reports had been fragmented, but what little information they had gathered pointed to a single, terrifying reality. Callan had knowledge of Project Echelon. The Council's highest-ranking officials had long feared this moment. Project Echelon wasn't just classified, it was a crime against the fabric of the universe itself. It was a secret buried so deeply that even most warlords were unaware of its existence. If Callan knew about it, he could not be allowed to live. The Council's response. A closed-door meeting was held in the Spire of Dominion, the heart of the Galactic Council. In a chamber filled with towering figures, some humanoid, others monstrous in form, the fate of one man was being decided. High Chancellor Vadris, a reptilian being with glistening obsidian scales, paced before the gathered officials. "This human has become an infestation," she hissed. "One that must be eradicated before it spreads." "But why not deploy a fleet?" a bureaucrat suggested. "A coordinated strike." The Chancellor's golden eyes narrowed. "Because we do not know how deep his reach extends. We do not know what he has become." The room fell silent. After a pause, another voice, deep and guttural, spoke from the shadows. "There is no need for fleets," said High Commander Varkos. At the mention of his name, the entire chamber turned their attention to him. Varkos was not just a warlord, he was the warlord. The strongest warrior the Council had ever produced. A living legend. A conqueror whose very presence had made planetary leaders surrender without a fight. 7 feet tall, his body was a fusion of organic muscle and cybernetic enhancements. His armor, forged from the remains of a dead star, had never been breached in battle. He had extinguished rebellions with his bare hands, reduced planets to cinders with his strategy, and outmatched every assassin foolish enough to challenge him. And now, he was offering to handle one man. "I will find him," Varkos continued, his voice like grinding stone. "And I will bring you his head." The hunt begins. Varkos departed that very night, taking with him a single warship, the Judicator, a vessel designed for surgical strikes. His team consisted of only the best, elite warriors, infiltrators, and executioners. They weren't just soldiers, they were monsters in human skin, trained to kill without hesitation. Their destination? A desolate moon on the far reaches of the Orion Arm, designated VX-32, where the last confirmed sighting of Callan had been reported. As they neared the barren world, Varkos reviewed the intelligence reports one final time. The data was incomplete, intentionally so, it seemed. There were no confirmed images of Callan. No biometric scans. No intercepted communications. Just whispers of carnage and the impossible. Varkos smirked. The Council had grown soft, fearing ghosts and fairy tales. He would remind them what true power looked like. The Judicator descended into the moon's atmosphere, its engine screaming against the silence of space. Through the thick cloud cover, the surface of VX-32 came into view, a bleak, frozen wasteland, its ground fractured by deep canyons and towering spires of obsidian rock. Infrared scans. Varkos barked. "No signs of life," his lieutenant responded. "But, sir, there is something odd." Varkos turned sharply. "Define odd." The lieutenant hesitated before displaying the ship's scanning results. "There are remains here. A lot of them. But none are human." Varkos frowned. The moon had been abandoned for centuries. Yet, scattered across its frozen plains were bodies of creatures never recorded in any known database. Some had exoskeletons the size of tanks, Others had twisted limbs as if their bodies had been morphed against their will. Something had happened here. Something old. Something wrong. Still, Varkos was undeterred. If Callan was here, he would find him. The descent into darkness. The Warlord and his squad deployed onto the moon's surface, their armored boots crunching against the frost-covered terrain. The wind howled through the canyons, carrying with it a faint, unnatural hum. Then, as they advanced deeper, they found something that made even Varkos hesitate. A fortress, seemingly carved from the moon's natural rock formations, loomed before them. No records mentioned this structure. No star maps acknowledged its existence. At its entrance, a set of massive metal doors stood open, revealing only darkness beyond. Thermal readings? Varkos asked. The lieutenant checked his scanner. His face went pale. There's nothing, sir. Not even residual heat. It's as if this place has been untouched for centuries. Varkos clenched his fists. He had faced armies. He had slaughtered gods. Whatever lay inside, it did not scare him. Move in, he ordered. The squad advanced. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No wind. No static from their comms. Just the sound of their own breathing. And then, a scream. Not a normal scream. Not human. Not animal. Something worse. The kind of sound that makes a man's blood freeze in his veins. It came from inside the fortress. Varkos smirked. Finally, he muttered, gripping his plasma blade. A real challenge. Then, without hesitation, he stepped into the abyss. The fortress swallowed them whole. Varkos and his elite squad moved deeper into the structure, their weapons raised, their senses razor-sharp. The air was thick, stagnant, carrying the scent of metal and something older, something rotten. The walls were smooth, unnatural. No markings. No signs of construction. It was as if the structure had grown rather than been built. Their boots echoed against the cold, unyielding floor, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the oppressive silence. Varkos wasn't afraid. He had faced creatures that made warlords weep. He had battled monstrosities in the vacuum of space, survived wars that reduced planets to dust. But there was something off about this place, something that gnawed at the edges of his mind. His lieutenant, a hardened soldier named Luther, broke the silence. Sir, still no signs of life. No heat signatures, no movement. Just, nothing. Varkos glanced at him. Luther was a killer, a veteran of the blood wars, but his voice had the faintest tremor. It didn't sit well with the warlord. Fear was weakness. Stay sharp, Varkos growled. Callan is here. I can feel it. The first vanishing. The squad moved cautiously, following the corridor deeper into the fortress. Then, suddenly, thud. The sound came from behind them. Varkos turned, his plasma blade humming to life. The squad's formation remained intact, but something was wrong. Where's Kex? Luther whispered. The squad turned their heads frantically, scanning their ranks. Kex, their sniper, was gone. No gunfire. No scream. No sign of a struggle. Just, gone. Com check, Varkos ordered. Static. Luther adjusted his earpiece, his brow furrowing. No signal. Something's jamming us. Varkos clenched his jaw. He had no patience for games. Keep moving. If Callan thinks he can pick us off one by one, he's mistaken. They pressed on, the silence more suffocating than before. Then, they found the first body. Or what was left of it. Signs of a hunt. The corpse wasn't Kex. It wasn't even human. The body belonged to an alien species none of them recognized, a twisted, insect-like thing with too many limbs, its exoskeleton shattered as if something had ripped it apart from the inside. What the hell is this? One of the soldiers muttered. Varkos knelt beside the corpse, examining the wounds. The cuts were surgical, clean, yet there were no burn marks from energy weapons, no bullet wounds. Whatever had killed this thing had done it up close. This isn't Callan's work, Luther said. He wouldn't leave bodies behind. He never does. Varkos stood. Then something else is down here. The silence stretched. No one dared to move. Then, another sound. Not behind them. Ahead. A whisper. A voice carried through the corridors, distorted, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. You shouldn't have come. It was Callan. But it wasn't. The descent into madness. Spread out, Varkos ordered. Find him. They moved forward, weapons raised, scanning every shadow. But the fortress was shifting. The corridors that should have led back weren't there anymore. The walls changed when they weren't looking, stretching and twisting, forming new pathways that hadn't existed seconds before. "This place isn't right," one of the soldiers muttered. Another scream. "Closer this time." "Move!" Varkos barked. They ran. The lights flickered. Shadows stretched and contorted. Then, Luther vanished. 1 second, he was beside Varkos, plasma rifle raised. The next, he was simply gone. No sound. No struggle. Nothing. The remaining soldiers formed a tight circle, their nerves fraying. Their breathing was ragged, their eyes darting through the darkness. Varkos snarled. This wasn't how he fought. He didn't play these games. He needed Callan to come out and face him. The message. Then they saw it. A single device, resting on the ground before them. A data pad. Varkos picked it up, the screen flickering to life. A video played. It was a recording of Varkos and his squad. The footage was from minutes ago, from inside the fortress. The video played back everything. Them moving through the corridors. Finding the body. Hearing Callan's voice. Then, in the video, the camera panned slightly. It showed something they hadn't seen before. A figure had been following them the entire time. A shadow just behind them. Unseen. Unheard. Watching. The screen flickered again. The last image was of Luther's face, frozen in terror, eyes wide, right before something pulled him into the darkness. Varkos clenched his fists. He wasn't afraid. But he was angry. The face of the impossible. Then the lights cut out completely. Total darkness. No sound. No movement. Varkos activated his helmet's night vision. His soldiers did the same. The world was bathed in green. Then, a shadow moved. Not in front of them. Not behind them. Above. Something dropped from the ceiling. A blur of motion. 2 more soldiers were gone. Now, it was just Varkos and 3 others. Then, a voice. This time, clearer. "You were never the hunters." A figure stepped out from the shadows. Jack Callan. Or at least, what had once been Jack Callan. His form was human, mostly. His eyes glowed a cold, unnatural blue. His veins pulsed with something not of this world. His movements were too smooth, too controlled. And his voice. It wasn't just his. There was something else inside him. Varkos took a step forward, rage overtaking reason. "You think you can intimidate me, human?" he growled. "I will break you." Callan smiled. His head tilted slightly, like a predator amused by its prey. Then he whispered. "You still don't understand, do you?" The walls shifted again, closing in. The last 3 soldiers were pulled into the darkness. Their screams echoed through the corridors. Now, Varkos stood alone. Callan took another step forward, unarmed, unworried. Then, he said the words that sent a shiver through even the Warlord's spine. "They sent you to kill a man, Varkos. But what you've found is something else entirely." The darkness came alive. And Varkos realized, this was never a hunt. It had always been a trap. The fortress was no longer just a structure, it was alive. The walls pulsed like veins beneath flesh. The corridors shifted, folding into new pathways that hadn't been there before. What had once been cold, lifeless stone now breathed. Varkos stood alone in the darkness. His elite strike team, some of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy, had been picked off one by one. No bodies. No gunfire. Just silence and screams swallowed by the abyss. Now, it was only him. And Jack Callan. The figure before him was no longer just a man. Callan's eyes glowed with an unnatural, electric blue. His veins pulsed with something alien. His stance was too relaxed, a predator watching its prey struggle to understand why it had already lost. Varkos' grip tightened around his plasma blade. He had slaughtered civilizations, stood victorious over fallen warlords. He did not fear ghosts. "You should have brought an army," Callan said, his voice layered with something inhuman. Varkos smirked. "I didn't need one." Then he lunged. The battle that should have been. Varkos moved with the speed of a war-forged predator, closing the distance in a blur. His plasma blade slashed forward, aiming for Callan's throat. A direct hit. Or it should have been. Instead, Callan wasn't there anymore. He moved, faster than anything Varkos had ever seen. One moment he was standing still, the next he was behind the Warlord. A whisper brushed against Varkos' ear. "You were too slow." Pain erupted across his ribs. Callan hadn't even used a weapon, just a single, precise strike with his bare hands. But the force of it sent Varkos flying across the corridor, slamming into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. Varkos rolled to his feet, blood dripping from his lips. Impossible. No human, not even augmented warriors, moved like that. What are you? Varkos snarled. Callan tilted his head, his glowing blue eyes narrowing slightly. Then, he took a step forward. Varkos attacked again, faster this time. His blade cut through the air in a blur, but Callan weaved through the strikes like a phantom, his movements fluid, almost effortless. Then, Callan caught the blade with his bare hand. The plasma should have burned through flesh. Should have melted bone. Instead, Callan's fingers closed around it, his skin untouched by the energy. He squeezed, and the weapon shattered. Varkos stumbled back, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. His weapons were useless. And Callan hadn't even tried yet. The breaking of a warlord. Varkos switched tactics. If brute force didn't work, he would go for precision. He raised his gauntlet, activating the black hole grenade, a microsingularity designed to collapse anything caught in its event horizon. A weapon so powerful it had once swallowed an entire fleet in a blink. He hurled it at Callan. The grenade detonated instantly, reality bending inward, gravity warping into a crushing vortex. The air screamed as space itself was ripped apart. Nothing could escape. Nothing except Callan. The moment the singularity formed, Callan walked through it. Not dodging. Not resisting. Just walking through an imploding reality as if it were nothing more than a summer breeze. Then he was in front of Varkos again. The warlord barely had time to react before Callan drove his fist into his chest. Pain. Unimaginable pain. Varkos had never known what it felt like to be broken. His ribs cracked. His enhanced organs ruptured. His body, reinforced with cybernetics and armor that had withstood planetary bombardments, failed him. The warlord fell to one knee, blood pouring from his mouth. His vision blurred. No. This wasn't possible. He had conquered galaxies. Killed gods. He was Varkos the Unbroken. Callan crouched in front of him, studying him with those glowing, inhuman eyes. I expected more, Callan murmured. Varkos tried to move. Tried to fight. But his body refused. You were never meant to win this fight, Callan continued, his tone almost disappointed. Then kill me, Varkos spat, his voice ragged. Callan simply smiled. No. The truth that should have stayed buried. Varkos' mind spun. He had lost. He knew he had lost. But Callan wasn't finishing him off. Why? Then the fortress shifted again. The walls pulsed, revealing something new. A chamber, one that hadn't been there before. Varkos saw machines. Ancient. Towering. Alive. Floating stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a humanoid figure. Their bodies were restrained, their minds locked in endless slumber. Their eyes, when visible, glowed the same blue as Callan's. And then Varkos understood. You weren't the first, he whispered. Callan nodded. Project Echelon. The warlord's breath hitched. He knew that name. The Council's greatest secret. The experiment that had created something beyond human, beyond alien. A fusion of organic matter and something not of this universe. Something that should never have existed. The Council, Varkos coughed, blood dripping from his lips. They created you. Callan's expression darkened. They tried to, he said. But they didn't understand what they had found. The things inside us, inside me, weren't meant to be controlled. Varkos felt cold. The Council had sent him to kill a man. But Jack Callan was not a man anymore. He was something else. Something that had consumed every warlord, assassin, and hunter before him. And now, he had decided to stop hiding. You're coming for them, Varkos realized, horror sinking into his bones. Callan's gaze never wavered. They sent you to kill me, he said softly. Now I'm going to return the favor. The final choice. Varkos had never begged in his life. But for the first time, he wondered if death was the better option. Callan tilted his head, as if sensing his thoughts. I won't kill you, he said. I need you to deliver a message. Varkos forced himself to his feet, his bones screaming in protest. What message? Callan stepped back, his blue eyes glowing brighter. The entire fortress shook, the walls splitting open like a cocoon about to hatch. Tell the Council, Callan whispered, I'm coming. Varkos turned and ran, fleeing for his life. As he escaped, the last thing he heard was laughter, not just from Callan. From the walls. From the air. From the things that had woken up. Jack Callan had been the Council's greatest mistake. And now, he was their reckoning. Varkos had never run from a battle before. Yet now, his body forced him to flee. Every step sent pain lancing through his broken ribs, his cybernetic system struggling to compensate for the damage. Blood dripped from his mouth, leaving a trail as he stumbled through the shifting corridors of the fortress. Behind him, the laughter faded, but the presence remained. Jack Callan wasn't chasing him. He didn't need to. The walls pulsed, the very structure of the fortress bending and twisting as if Callan's will controlled it. The air was charged with something ancient, something beyond Varkos' understanding. As he reached the outer corridors, his comm unit crackled to life. Varkos? Varkos, do you read? It was his ship, orbiting above. He coughed, pain exploding in his ribs. I'm alive. Get a dropship down here now. Understood. Wait. What the hell is that? Static swallowed the transmission. Then the ground shook. Varkos turned just in time to see the fortress cracking open, the sky above warping. Something massive began to rise from within. It wasn't a structure. It was a prison. And Callan had just unlocked it. The awakening. The sky ripped apart. Ships in orbit, war vessels, patrol units, council scouts, vanished as something tore through reality itself. Varkos barely managed to board the dropship before the entire planet screamed. He looked down from the viewport as the fortress crumbled away, revealing a monolith of obsidian metal beneath it, a buried construct, older than anything known to the galaxy. And it was waking up. Lightning arced across the surface, fracturing the sky. Then came the voices. Not words. Not screams. Just a presence. A pulse that shook Varkos to his core. His pilot pulled them into orbit, but the moment they breached the atmosphere, they saw what had already begun. The fleet was gone. The warships that had accompanied them, annihilated. No debris. No wreckage. Only silence. Then, through the void, Callan's voice echoed through every open channel. The council buried their mistake. And now it's awake. I told you to stay out of the dark. Now it will consume you. Varkos had fought cosmic horrors before. He had faced species that devoured entire planets. But this was something else. This was not a war. This was a correction. And Callan was no longer just a man. He was the harbinger of whatever was coming next. The Council's last stand. The journey back to the Council's core world was a blur. Varkos barely registered the hyperspace jump. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the fortress, no, the prison, opening. He saw the things inside it, waking for the first time in millennia. He had no name for them. No classification. Just a certainty. The galaxy was not ready. As his ship landed on the Council's homeworld, the High Lords were already waiting. A vast chamber. Towering figures, draped in gold and obsidian robes. The rulers of the known universe. Varkos staggered forward, still bleeding. He didn't bow. He didn't kneel. He spoke. His coming. Silence. Then one of the lords, a towering figure with a mechanical voice, stepped forward. We sent you to kill a man, the lord said. Why do you return alone? Varkos laughed, though it came out as a bitter, blooded rasp. You didn't send me to kill a man, he said. You sent me into a graveyard. He recounted everything. The fortress. The vanishing of his men. The impossible speed, the unnatural power. The pods, the glowing blue eyes, the voices inside Callan's head that were not his own. And then, finally, the truth. You tried to create the ultimate weapon, Varkos spat. You tried to control something beyond control. He locked eyes with the council. And now, it's coming back for you. The room darkened. Not from a failing power source. From something outside. Varkos turned toward the great, transparent windows overlooking the city world of the council. His heart stopped. Above the planet, reality itself twisted. A fleet should have been there. A planetary defense grid, warships strong enough to hold an armada at bay. But instead, there was only darkness. The sky was gone. Something was swallowing it whole. Then came the whispers. Every screen across the council's chambers flickered to life. And Callan's face appeared. No. Not just Callan. All of them. The ones in the pods. The ones that had been buried. Their glowing blue eyes burned through the screen, their voices merging into one. You should have left us buried. And then, the sky shattered. The end and the beginning. The last war of the galaxy began in silence. There were no great battles, no fleets clashing in glorious combat. The moment Callan and the others like him arrived, the Council's forces ceased to exist. Entire worlds simply disappeared, swallowed by something outside time, outside understanding. Planets fell into black voids that did not obey physics. Empires collapsed without a single shot being fired. And Varkos? He ran. For the first time in his existence, he fled. He took the fastest ship he could find and left the core worlds behind. There was no council left to serve. No empire left to rule. Only the echoes of Callan's final message. You tried to make us gods. But you failed to understand one thing. Gods don't serve. They consume. The last time Varkos looked back at the council's homeworld, it was already gone. A shadow in the shape of a world. A scar where something once stood. And Callan? Wherever he was now, he was no longer just a man. He was the end of the old world. And the beginning of something far worse. Epilogue, The Whispering Stars. In the farthest reaches of the void, where no empire dared tread, a single distress beacon blinked. A salvager ship picked up the signal, hoping for a derelict vessel to scavenge. Instead, they found a man. Or what had once been one. His eyes glowed blue. He smiled. And then, the distress beacon stopped transmitting. Because the ship was no longer there. The stars whispered. And the shadows grew deeper. The hunt was over. The feast had begun.